Democracy, as they say, is on the ballot in Chicago tonight, where the worst mayor probably in recorded history, Lori Lightfoot, is up for election. She's the one who hired the 1,000 cats to fight the rat problem in Chicago. Trace Gallagher has been following all of this. He's joining us tonight with an update. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker. So the polls are now closed in Chicago, and they're now in the process of counting the early ballots. We're talking about some 240,000 ballots, and so far, it appears to be a very tough night for the incumbent mayor, Lori Lightfoot. We now have 73% of the early votes counted, and Paul Vallas, this is the former Chicago Public Schools CEO, has 36% of the vote. Now, Vallas has been endorsed by the police union. He bills himself as the tough-on-crime candidate. In second, you have Brandon Johnson. He's a current Cook County commissioner and former school teacher who is supported by the Chicago Teachers Union. He's now pulling about 20% of the vote. And in third place, Lori Lightfoot. She's at just under 16%, not really doing well. In recent weeks, Brandon Johnson's surge has made headlines because it was so surprising and so fast. But this is primarily about crime because even Chicago is tired of the increase in violent crime all across Chicagoland. So once the early ballots are counted, they'll move on to the rest of the votes. But remember, it could take a while because if one candidate does not get more than 50%, it goes to an April 4th runoff. And that means this could last for weeks. We should know with 73% of the early ballots counted, we can now tell you that Paul Vallas will be in that runoff. Whether Lori Lightfoot makes the runoff is yet to be seen. So she is known for dancing at awkward times. It appears that Lori Lightfoot will likely not be doing any dancing tonight because she may not even make it to the next round. We'll keep counting, we'll keep tabulating, and get back to you with results. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, consistently the bearer of good news. There are not many of those. Thank you, Trace.
You bet.
If Lori Lightfoot got reelected, you'd really have to rethink the system. I mean, what would that be? Terrifying. So if you want to control a country, obviously you have to erase its history, so no one has any idea what went before, and then the future is yours. And that's why they tear down monuments to our past. In New York, they tore down the Teddy Roosevelt statue, the greatest of all American presidents, the most popular. It stood there for many years, and now it's gone. Rioters have done this all over the country. So that wasn't enough. So now woke lunatics at the Pentagon have decided to desecrate America's biggest and most significant cemetery, Arlington National, right across from Washington, D.C., and tear down a memorial to Civil War dead. Chris Bedford is the executive editor of the Common Sense Society and just wrote such a thoughtful and interesting piece on what is happening and what it means. He joins us tonight. Chris Bedford, thank you. So I'm not sure I can in any way improve on what you wrote. Summarize it for us, if you would.
Well, right now what they're trying to tear down is the monument in Arlington that marks the Confederate war dead. Now, this is not a monument to victory. It's not a monument that says, rise up again, this war is coming. This is a monument to reconciliation. It's a funerary monument that stands over the graves of people, including the architect and a number of other Confederate war dead who are buried there now in Arlington. This is something that symbolizes peace. At its center is a robed woman holding a laurel crowned with branches and also holding the plowshare that stands for beating our swords into a plowshare. Now beneath that is a frieze centered on Athena, a circular frieze that shows Southerners answering the call to war. And that's something the critics have a problem with. It does show a romanticized and idealized version of the South there, but it is at its core a monument to that reconciliation. And it came during a very complicated period in time. If we think that 2020 was complicated, the period after the Civil War, where about 2% of the American population gave their lives in battle, was extremely tense and complicated. For decades afterwards, Confederates were not even allowed to, not even the families were allowed to tend the graves of those who were fallen. But America actually got through what most countries never get through. They got through the Civil War, and 30 years later, when they ended up fighting side by side in the Spanish-American War, that mutual affection was rekindled, and there was a softening of hearts, and people who had fought on both sides reached out to each other and said, we're going to try and come together and build something to reconciliation. Now, the people who built this, the daughters of the Confederacy, know that this was not a perfect country. Not a single one of them could vote at that period. There were still a lot of problems that we had to get through, but coming together in that complicated history is what's essential for us to remember, and tearing it down is very simple-minded.
How vicious to do this to a graveyard 150 years later. Is there, very quickly, is there any way to stop this erasure of American history? It's not theirs to erase, is it?
I think there is. The Congress has given the Pentagon the ability to erase these things, but they're talking about base names and roads. Things like Arlington National Cemetery fall under the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts. That's part of the cemetery. That's civic architecture. That's something the military, though they like to bulldoze over authority, actually has to maybe take a back seat to.
Yeah, you can't desecrate graveyards. Sorry. I don't care who's buried there. Chris Bedford, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we spent a lot of time beating up on the White House press corps, but there is someone in the White House press corps who's worth knowing, an amazing man. His name is Simon Atiba. He's covering the White House, the American government, for an audience in Africa, and we thought it'd be great to sit down with him. It was better even than we imagined. He grew up impoverished in Cameroon before becoming the toughest reporter in Washington. We asked him in a long conversation about his life for Tucker Carlson today. Here's part of it.
When I thought that everything was great, I decided to travel from Cameroon to Nigeria by sea, and I was attacked by pirates on the Gulf of Guinea. And
I'm not going on vacation with you. I'm sorry. It's not personal.
yeah, and I was attacked.
So you finally get out of prison in northern Cameroon and decide to go back to Nigeria by boat, but you get attacked by pirates?
I was attacked by pirates on the Gulf of Guinea, and they had an AK. Piracy is rampant around, between Cameroon and Nigeria. And I was almost getting to Nigeria, and we saw these boats, this speedboat that began to come towards us. They were like, lie on the ground, your money, bring everything out. And eventually they had this gun. That was the first time in my life that I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Having a gun to your head, I thought this guy may pull the trigger.
Yeah.
But eventually the guy didn't pull the trigger. I survived, and it became too much other things. And I decided to, become who I really wanted to be, because I feel like I was given a second chance every time. And I decided to really live life to the fullest. And that's how I ended up in the U.S.
So how do you get from the point where you've got an AK-47 to your head from a pirate in the Gulf of Guinea to being in the White House press room?
So I'm back in Nigeria doing my stuff. I don't have money. Life is always tough. I'm covering the U.S. Embassy. They are giving grants to everybody except Simon. They are asking Simon every day to come and cover them. And I feel like telling them, don't you have eyes? I've been covering you for 5 years. I'm getting old. You guys are not giving me any thing. And you're giving things to people who can't do anything. And I'm here. Don't you see? They were blind and they were not seeing. And I felt like, oh my God, all the money that comes from the US to these countries don't actually go to the people who need it,
No.
to the people who do things that can even benefit the US. Here I am covering you, ambassador after ambassador, doing every single thing, and you give scholarship to every single person around me except the person who has been there for you. Don't you see? And they didn't do anything. And I decided to take my life into my own hands and decided to move to the US and work for Today News Africa. And the reason I decided to cover the Biden administration was because I knew, as I said, he was the perfect good guy. CNN had told me for years, that the races were the conservative, the Republicans.
Yes.
And those were the bad guys, the people who live in the Midwest with, redneck white guys with no college degrees who live in the Midwest. Don't have anything to do with them because those are the racists and you can't have anything to do with them. Stick with Biden. And so I ended up at the White House with President Biden, the good guy.
And as soon as he got there, they refused to talk to him. Equity. Simon Atiba, one of the great guys on Fox Nation Now. We'll be right back.